All right. So again, remember I told you guys we're gonna get into a lot of books. We're gonna try to put it all together and just show you that a lot of people are saying the same thing. And who are these nations of the world? Why were they fighting with certain other nations of the world? It all start making sense. And little by little, we start seeing, these so-called Hebrews or Israelites influence in history more and more, and who they were in history. So let's continue. It says here, we're gonna read from this book, Ancient History of Caledonia, written by Saint Chaldean and the other saints of the Chaldean faith, and chiefly by the Johnstones, who held the royal pen for many hundreds years. Translated from the Latin by the Reverend Duncan MacGregor, published by John McLaren Seaman Dunnan. Before I continue, I just want to show you guys don't know what Caledonia is. We have mentioned it in my Ireland or of the Chaldees, Chaldee, Chaldee, Caledonian, Chaledonian, Chaldee, Chaldee. Either way, Caledonia says here was the Latin name used by the Roman Empire to refer to the part of Great Britain that lies north of the River Forth, which includes most of the land area of Scotland. Today, it is used as a romantic or poetic name for all of Scotland. Caledonians, or Caledoni, or the Caledonian Confederacy, were a Brittonic-speaking Celtic tribal confederacy in what is now Scotland during the Iron Age and Roman eras. The Greek form of the tribal name gave rise to the name Caledonia for their territory. The Caledonians were considered to be a group of the Britons, who are the Britons, Brit, but later, after the Roman conquest of the southern half of Britain, the northern inhabitants were distinguished as Picts. Who's the ancient Picts, huh? Thought to be a related people who would have also spoken a Brittonic language. The Caledonian Britons were thus enemies of the Roman Empire, enemies of Edomites. So who are the Caledonians fighting the Romans, huh? Which was the state then administering most of the Great Britain. So the Romans had invaded. So they're, like the Picts and Britons, they're pre-Viking, pre-Roman. They were there from ancient times in these lands. Now we know where Caledonia is, right? So we got the History of Caledonia book we're going back to. And this book is from 1874. Now, before I read this book, he explains how he got this transcript, this old Latin document. He says, I think it necessary to state how I became possessed of the original copy of the ancient history of Caledonia. I was a sailor on board a man of war, returning in 1842. I was one day sent on store duty to the Tower of London. One of my shipmates, calling me by name, a gentleman who heard him, came to me and said, Am I like Jock at the fair? Are there more McLaurens here than me? I answered that I was a McLauren. We became very intimate. He was master gunner at the Tower, by name David McLauren. I remained there all night, and the topic of conversation happening to fall upon nationality, he informed me that he had seen a book in the shop of a Jew in Petticoat Lane with the word Chaldea, Caledonia, Chaldea, marked upon it. Through curiosity, I went along with him to see it. What he called the book turned out to be a large roll of written skins, not very well preserved, there being holes here and there, and the writing in many places injured by damp. An oaken box, which had contained the roll, attracted my attention. It was lined with copper and had outside on the lid a great many ornaments in the same metal, including a large lion rampant with a sword in his paw, lying, right? I offered him a sum of money for the box, but he would not part with it until he had first removed the mountain from it. I then offered him a piece of money for the book, which he refused. But when I left, he followed after me with it, insisting that I should take it at the price offered. And to avoid being mobbed, I paid the book, got possession of it, and left. After returning home, I tried several clergymen with it, but received no encouragement until I met with Reverend Duncan McGregor, Roman Catholic priest, Lochaber. He told me it was the ancient history of Caledonia. All right, so remember, let's go back. He says that the actual book cover said Chaldea marked upon it. Remember, he said it said Chaldea. Why would it say Chaldea? But it actually means the ancient history of Caledonia. Where is ancient Chaldea? Again, check out my Ireland Ur of the Chaldees series, and you'll see why. He translated it from the ancient Latin in which it was written into the Gaelic language, as I expected from the nature of the book that it would command a greater sale in that language. From various causes, it never was printed in Gaelic, but from this translation, I have now got it translated into the English language, the original document being completely destroyed during the first translation by the means taken to make the writing legible. I was in Lord Royal's employment on his estate of Duncroft, near Dunnan, about the year 1862. I told his lordship of the former existence of a tower on his estate, which I knew of from the history. Becoming interested, he made inquiries on the subject, but the oldest man in the neighborhood had never heard of it. He then ordered a search to be made under my direction, which was successful in laying bare the foundations of the tower. Several other statements in this history are proved by recent discoveries. For example, the sinking of St. Andrews has been verified by the fishermen, who have discovered walls and other remains 3 miles out at sea. The prophecies of St. Isaac are partly fulfilled. Son of Isaac, all right? Sons of Isaac, Saxon. The original writing from which this history is translated are believed to have been carried away by Edward I, along with the marble chair and Jacob's pillow. Jacob's pillar, we're talking about the stone of destiny, upon which the Caledonians crowned their kings at Scone Palace. The Caledonians, the ancient Scottish people, who brought the stone? Remember, it was Jeremiah. Jeremiah, it's all connected. John McLaren, okay? So he's saying he was able to prove already some things with this translation, and we're going to get a little bit of that translation. It says here, ancient history of Caledonia. After the death of Pharaoh, who loved Joseph, the king of Egypt, and his rulers saw that the Hebrews prospered more than the Egyptians, that their fields and their vines were more fruitful and pleasant, and also that their wives and daughters were more fair and beautiful than their own. Pharaoh, the king, then made a law that all those who did not bow down the knee to the bull and offer sacrifices upon the king's altar were to be double tied and their children brought into slavery, which grieved the Hebrews very much, but they still remembered their God, and went to the desert and offered sacrifice to the God of Bethel. Pharaoh then, being wroth of this, brought all the Hebrews under slavery. The Egyptian slaves got straw to make their bricks, but the Hebrews had to collect stubble and make the same number of bricks as the Egyptians, which made their task very grievous to bear. But they still trusted that God would deliver them from bondage. The king Pharaoh was enraged and ordered all the Hebrew children to be slain when they were born. This caused several of the tribes of the Hebrews to draw together, who never defiled themselves among the Egyptians. They then departed into the desert and withdrew themselves from among them. Pharaoh the king, being wroth, pursued them into the desert with horses and chariots. The Israelites, all right, now they're not just Hebrews, they're Israelites specifically, seeing Pharaoh's host at hand, cried to the God of Bethel to deliver them from the hand of their enemy. Then the God of heaven raised a storm of wind and sand, mountains high, so that they could not find them, and afterwards left them to wander through the desert of Assyria, chiefly living upon fruit. All right, remember, they're over here kind of going almost with the story of Moses, right? Exodus coming out of Egypt. A different take on it here. The king of Greece, observing encampments and being at war with the Egyptians and Assyrians, sent an ambassador to inquire if they had broken the truce that had been made. But they found nothing but working men of crafty work. Now, real quick, so you guys don't get confused. They're in the wilderness, right? They're in the desert. The Israelites just left Egypt during their exodus. They reached these lands where there's a king, so-called king of Greece. This is a Danite. This is when the Danites were ruling this part of Greece. This was a Danite. We got the other side of the story in my Danites videos. And you're going to see he didn't make war with these Israelites. So he's like, go spy on them. So he had sent somebody to spy on them. And then the person said, hey, I'm only finding working men of crafty work, namely copper, brass, dyeing and weaving, and also brick making. The king then, finding they were Hebrews, dispatched an Hebrew interpreter, whom they told that they were no rebellious people, that they were under the necessity of fleeing from Egypt to the desert from the oppression and cruelty of Pharaoh. The Hebrew servant returned and told the king of Greece that they were not men of war, but were working men of craftsmen of Egypt. The king, being pleased with such good news, sent his servant again, telling them to pitch their tents in any plain in his dominions where they pleased, telling them at the same time that they could worship their own God after their own fashion. Now, why would Greeks do that? Remember, this is a Danite, these are his people. Now, another thing I want to point out, he's saying working men of Egypt doesn't mean they're Egyptians. They were coming out of Egypt, just like a so-called gypsy is somebody who's coming out of Egypt, or an Egyptian. They would be referred to as Egyptian, or gypsies too. They're traveling right in the desert, so called gypsies. It's all going to combine. You guys will see. The Hebrews then built an altar to the Lord and offered sacrifice for the great deliverance and saving them from the hands of the Egyptians. The king of Greece visited their camps with his Hebrew servant, telling them to build a city and fortify themselves against their enemies, whoever they might be. They, having confidence in this king of Greece, all right, they trust this king of Greece, and seeing that the Lord's hand was in their deliverance, commenced to build their city of Troy. Who built Troy? Israelites. So again, these Israelites fleeing Egypt, Exodus, just like Cadmus and Danaan. We're talking about Israelites settling down, becoming great nations, these so-called early Greek nations. Here's another case of it right here. They built the city of Troy. It was Israelites. The materials of which this city was built were bricks made of clay. This clay was dug to make a canal round the whole city, with drawbridges to draw up at any time for securing them from their enemies. The work went on so rapidly that they soon found themselves in a fortified position. And as the population increased, so did the city enlarge, the building going on with much vigor. And at the same time, the other tradesmen were employed at their own trades, supplying the other nations around them with purple, scarlet, and fine linen, purple, and war instruments of brass, copper, and iron. This surprised the kings of Egypt very much, he having labored under the impression that all the Hebrews were consumed in the mountains of sand, which nearly destroyed the Egyptians, but these had rather served as a protection to the Hebrews. The king of Greece gave every encouragement to the Hebrews, so did he adhere to their ways that he was almost persuaded to worship their God. Almost. Remember, this is a Danite who, these were sea peoples. They had gone all over the world and mixed, and, they were probably doing a little pagan stuff too. They become Hellenized. But owing to his rulers, he almost started going back to Hawa, it says here. But owing to his rulers being worshippers of the horse, they would not allow the king to turn from his former principle, namely worshiping the horse, as the priest persuaded the king if he would turn from worshiping the horse, as that was the god of the Grecians in those days, all right? So-called Grecians, that his charges would not face the battle nor enter into the war chariots. Still, the king's heart was with the Hebrews. All right, this king, this Danite, he was with his brethren, and he allowed them to go on pilgrimage to the tops of the highest mountains to worship the God of heaven for his great deliverance of them from the cow worshippers of Egypt and the tyranny of Pharaoh. Cow worshippers of Egypt, huh? Just like the Hindus. This was their custom for several hundreds of years until war fell out between Greece and Assyria. So they were there for hundreds of years, okay? The Israelites. The Hebrews then refused their young men to go to war, neither would they allow their daughters to be given in marriage to the uncircumcised Gentiles, unless they would consent to be circumcised and offer 7 years' sacrifice and worship in the god of Bethel. Afterwards, one of the Grecian princes fell wroth with the inhabitants of Troy, properly called the Trojans. Who are the Trojans? Israelites. There was born to one of the princes of Troy a daughter that expelled in beauty and virtue all the Grecian nation. The prince of the Grecians offered her his hand in marriage, but was refused by the laws of the altar. He then besieged the city of Troy with rage and drove them into the city, thinking he would make them surrender from hunger. But they cried out to the Lord, and he heard their cry and was pleased to send shoals of fish of all kinds. But the sturgeon was considered the best fish, and therefore it was chosen for sacrifice on the altar. The turtle doves and pigeons were also innumerable around the city. They also made use of them for food, being also offered for sacrifice. The wild bee was also very plentiful, supplying them with honey. They lived there in comfort while their enemies were encamped around the city, suffering many privations. But the young generation arose, and new rulers refused to offer the sacrifices with the sturgeon, for as it was the best fish, they wished to keep it for themselves and offer other fish to the Lord. So remember, we're not reading the Bible. This is an old land document containing the history of Caledonia. All right. So because of what they were doing, Most High stopped helping them. All right. So it keeps going. I just want you guys to see, Troy was built by Israelites, as it says in this ancient document. All right. So the story keeps going. They eventually make it to, England, Scotland, and after, their travels through Europe. After crossing the sea from the true promised land, ended up in Gaul, Spain, Portugal, and then from there going to the British Isles. But for now, we're just going to continue real quick. I just want to show you guys, who were the ancient Trojans really. So we got the Achaeans or Aenians, the Danans, Cadmus people, the Trojans, Mycenaeans, Tyrians,